I didn't know that what I was doing was masking until I heard the term and it was explained to me. But I kind of used to hate it when people would tell me as a kid or a teenager to just be myself because I didn't know who that was. I kind of went through life just walking into a room, figuring out what people wanted and showing this curated version of myself.
Hello and welcome to Divergent Paths. I'm your host, Dr. Regina McMenemy. I am a doctor, but not that kind of doctor, and this is a podcast, not medical advice. Have you always felt a little different but didn't know why? Have you struggled with tasks that some people seem to handle with ease? Are you mystified by social norms and interactions? Divergent Paths is a podcast for late diagnosed neurodivergent people to discuss their journeys discovering the joys and frustrations of having a spicy brain. Each episode, I will interview someone who discovered they have ADHD, autism, or a combination of the two later in life. What defines a later in life diagnosis? Anytime the realization happens outside of the quote-unquote norm of childhood and adolescence. This episode, I talked to Rachel Ferdaszewski, a professional organizer, mom, and small business owner. We discussed the joys and pitfalls of discovering the genetic roots of our neurospicy families. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening to Divergent Paths. So I've been trying to remember the first time we met.
Well, I think I might have met you before, but the first time I remember really sitting down and talking with you was at that Halloween party that the kids had.
Yeah, and the kids were all running around, and I had missed the memo that the kids had sort of transitioned into drop-off parties.
Yeah.
And you and Amanda were hanging out for the party, and she was like, well, you can stay. And I'm like, I don't think Iris will be comfortable if I leave yet. So.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the reason that stands out to me is because we ended up talking about discovering that we were neurodivergent later in life. And the whole time we were talking, and Amanda was just like, that's a neurodivergent thing. And that's it was like, kind of like watching a mirror of what happened to me, you know, a couple months prior to that, maybe a year.
Yeah, because I think we had chatted in passing a couple of times before that, but it really was the first time that we like sat down and talked. And I remember very tentatively bringing it up and being like, well, when I started to realize I'm probably neurodivergent, I realized that some of these things I think are normal are not really, because
my normal is not normal.
Right. Yeah, exactly. My normal is not normal. And that is definitely, part of what I thought kind of bonded the two of us, and Amanda as well.
Yeah. And I've just gotten to this point in my life where I went through so much masking as a kid and a teenager and a young adult and, even early motherhood.
Yep.
In my 30s, where I just thought that I had to be a certain way and trying so hard and just so much energy sucking masking happening that by the time I met you, I was in the phase of here I am, and maybe you don't like me, maybe I'm not for you, but I'm not going to put any energy into being different.
Right. I hadn't really come to be that comfortable with the idea of not masking. I struggled in recognizing my mask because originally I would have said I didn't mask. And I think that's because it's a very automatic process for me. Now I know when it goes, I say my shields go up. I mean, very like Star Trek geeky thing, but my shields go up and I start protecting myself.
I love it.
Which I knew you would love that. But like I recognize it now. At that time, I would have probably more likely said, well, I don't really mask very often. And I think it's because I had just crafted personas that I felt were so much like me that I just took on personas that were like, oh, okay, this is this is very much like me and very much going to fit in this environment, and felt like that wasn't masking. Now I know. Now I know, because now the shields are down.
I didn't know that what I was doing was masking, until I heard the term and it was explained to me, but I
Yep.
kind of used to hate it when people would tell me as a kid or a teenager to just be myself because I didn't know who that was.
Right.
And I just kind of
I
went
was
through,
always like, I'm always myself. Like,
right, like I can't avoid being myself, but
mhm.
I kind of went through life just walking into a room, figuring out what people wanted and showing this curated version of myself that, you know, was those things and left out the things they might not want. And
Mhm.
because I know now, because of my neurodivergence, I have such a wide variety of interests. And I have done, a reasonably deep dive on so many different topics that I can make it seem like I am exactly like you. I can
Right.
be such a
Yes.
mirror,
Yes.
and I would do that
Mhm.
so automatically that when somebody would say just be yourself, I would think like, well, I plan to be myself, but what part of me?
Right.
Which version of me are you telling me to be right now?
Right? Which version are you looking for? Because it comes in 7 different flavors,
Right?
from mild to spicy to extra spicy. It's like,
Uh-huh.
where exactly do you want this to come? Yes, I think I have similar tastes. We've talked about this before, where people are very comfortable with us, right? Like,
Yes,
that kind of masking, that flavor of masking, comes from working to make sure the people you're with are comfortable.
yes. And
Yes,
and often ignoring how uncomfortable you are until much, much later.
exactly. And much later you're like, but wait, I was not comfortable with that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I said yes and I meant no. Oh, great.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, those are hard things to kind of come back to. So you talked a little bit about, like, having, like, a lot of knowledge about a bunch of different things. Do you have some, like, persistent special interests that have just kind of, like, continued through your life?
I have several, and I I made a career out of one of them. I love to categorize things and organize
Ah,
things, and
mhm,
I built my business as a professional organizer, kind of based on that, um, and and combined it with another special interest of mine, which is psychology and how people work. And so just kind of figuring out, well, how does this person work, and how do I help them manage their life and their stuff
mhm,
more efficiently by building systems to categorize their things in a way that helps them.
right.
But the like ostentatiously fun things that I have been stuck on are, I from a very young age have been intensely interested in King Henry VIII's wives. My mom used to sing me this song about being Henry VIII, and I don't know what it's from. And this guy is just like, I'm Henry VIII, I am.
Yeah, my mom used to sing that
I
too.
I am. Just got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and
Yeah.
everyone was an Henry. Never had a Willie or Sam. I'm a rich old man. Henry. Henry VIII, I am. And like, I didn't know why that was funny. And then when I found out that he had had 6 wives, I was like, well, what? And, you know, just all of the different details of that situation. I didn't care that much about him as a
Right.
person, but like all of these women, and as I have gotten older, like their personalities and plights and like
Mhm.
it's just become a deeper fascination rather than fading away. So it's like one of those things where you're like, why is this the thing that got stuck in my brain, right? Like
Right,
there's so many different things that I have been interested in for 5
right.
minutes, and but that's just one of those things that just never
It just never
goes
went away.
away. Yeah.
Yeah, I've mentioned a few times as I've been recording the podcast that, like, especially the last episode that they were recorded was about hyperfocus, and one of my frustrations with hyperfocus is it's not a switch that you can turn on and off, right? You don't always get to
Yeah.
choose. And special interests tend to be that way too. I don't we, for whatever reason, we don't always get to choose what the things are that persist.
Yeah, if only, right?
If only we could pick.
I've had a lot of special interests that have been beneficial to me in other ways. Getting interested in triathlons, for example, was
Mhm.
a very healthy coping mechanism through the lockdown. And, um, you know, bought all the gear and did all the stuff. And I was very fit and all of that. And it's not that I don't care anymore, it's just that I don't have that drive, and,
Sure.
I wish that, I did, because
Mhm.
it was so good for me, and it wasn't hard to make myself do it, right?
Right. Yes, it wasn't let me build the motivation or let me plan it out or let me set myself up with whatever steps I need to set up with so that I can do this thing. When it's a hyper focus, you just slide into it. Or when it's a special interest, you just slide into it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's reining yourself back that's the hard thing.
Right. Yes. Yes, exactly. Because sometimes we can go a little too far with things. What were some of the things that you felt like, sort of tipped off your neurodivergence or your sort of wondering or questioning? Did you have like a big event that was like, knock you upside the head? Oh, here I am. Or was it something that just sort of like slowly dawned on you?
It was definitely a big event. So, I was told by my youngest child's preschool teacher that we should probably have my daughter evaluated for ADHD.
Mm.
Um, and at the time, um, it was kind of hard to get an evaluation. I didn't really want to pay for one out of pocket, and
Yeah.
the schools won't do them until you're in school. And so she was not in kindergarten yet. And so it kind of got put on the back burner. But then when we did finally get around to it, I had been, um, sort of reading up on what to look for, right?
Hmm.
And so I had like very minimal knowledge of what executive dysfunction looks like in kids that age. And then they sent home this survey kind of thing that the parents are supposed to fill out, like this
Uh-huh.
long questionnaire. And I sat down to fill it out. And every single question, I would think to myself, well, she does that, but that's normal. I do that.
I do that.
And about halfway through this, like 4-page, probably like 50 questions, I was like, wait a minute.
Wait. No.
So just by the nature of the way that our, incredibly complex medical system works here in the
Mhm.
United States, I ended up being diagnosed before her.
Oh, well,
And
okay.
so, yeah, and I started on medication, and all the medications were awful. And I had to go through like this very long process of trying to find
Yeah.
something that would work and not. make me essentially switch off
Right.
when it wore off. Like, I would have these crashes where I would
Mhm.
just fall asleep sitting up.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
I had one medication where, it just heightened my paralysis, my decision paralysis
Oh,
so
god.
much.
That's like oh god, that's ugh. Decision paralysis is like the thing. Other than, like, when I try to start 4 sentences at one time, like, just
I
those
call
2
that
things.
glitching.
Yeah, yeah. When, like, you just,
The
like, get stuck.
ADHD glitch.
Yes. Yes, the glitching is hard, but the decision paralysis is really hard for me. Like, just the because I feel like I'm suffocating when I get like that. Like, I
Mhm.
can't decide, and I have tricks to, like, get myself out of it, which are usually, okay, what do you know you don't want? I will usually back my way into where I want to be with that question. But yeah, just so if I took a medication that made me, I would be very unhappy.
I took it one day, and I was
Mhm.
sitting on the edge of my bed, and I had called a friend who had, been through medication trial and error process, and I was like, can medications for this sometimes make your symptoms worse? And she was like, yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, this particular one was a extended release one, so it went on all day, and by the end of the day I was sitting on the edge of my bed crying. I had decided I needed to go for a run because my friend that I called was like, what do you do when you just need to feel better? And I was like, I exercise. And she was like, put on your clothes. And my husband came in to our bedroom and was like, are you going on a run? Because I had said that I was going to. And then it was like an hour later. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And I was just crying. And then he so timidly and very, very gently asked me, are you going to take this medication again tomorrow? And I said, no.
That's not a decision paralysis moment. We know this isn't happening again.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a wild ride, but now that I have one that works for me, um, you know, a lot of people think that when you find the medicine that works for you, it's going to like make you neurotypical, right? Just
Right.
like fix your brain chemistry, and
Yep.
it doesn't at
Mhm.
all.
Nope.
But it's also amazing how much easier my life is with the correct medication for me.
I agree. I tell a very similar story of, I know I still have ADHD. I still struggle with many of the same things, but it's at a point where the get up and go to get things done isn't as much of a struggle. Like, I don't have that as much decision paralysis. I still have, many thoughts hitting at the same time. I just saw a video today that was someone took, a regular pen and was like, a regular pen, or a neurotypical person has like one pen with one thought, and they just have to put the pen to paper to get the thought out. But like, a neurodiverse person has one of those pens with all the different colors that you have to like push one down to get it.
They get stuck on each other.
Yeah, and you're trying to push all of them down at the same time, and that's what neurodiverse is like. Like, you have all of these thoughts, and you have to get them out, and you don't know how to order them, and so
Mhm.
that's the ordering of thoughts and the ordering of actions and things is easier, and I can think myself through in terms of, like, okay, I am more motivated to do my dishes at night because I know if the kitchen is clean in the morning, I'm more likely to make a healthy breakfast for myself. And I can think through those steps
Okay.
and get the motivation, where before I would have been like, I don't have the energy to do this. Fine, whatever, I'll just leave it. So being able to think through those next steps seems to be a big thing for me.
That's fascinating because I happen to know that you and I take the same medication,
Yes.
and I have found the opposite is true. That
Really?
that it doesn't help me at all decide
Huh.
which
What is ordery or what to order?
yeah, what the priority is, but it does give
Yeah.
me the ability to see something that needs to be done and tell myself, "Not now." Like, I'm doing this other thing right now, and
I
I'm not
see.
gonna get sidetracked. It gives me the ability to say no to the side quest, right?
Okay.
The side
Right.
quest still pops up as an option on the screen, but I'm able to say no instead of just,
Right.
like, gallivanting off in
Right.
some
On the in
random
whatever other
direction.
direction you're able to kind of rein in and stay on track more. Fascinating. That's
Yeah, and
interesting.
without that anxiety. So, the
Right.
reason that unmedicated me would get off on these side quests that like just branched off into nothing
Wherever they did. Right. Yeah.
where um is that I couldn't I couldn't say no because I would be terrified that I would never come back to it,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
I had this anxiety that if I didn't do that thing right now, I would never make it back.
Right. You'd never get back to whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yep.
what I have found is it allows me to say no to the side quest and it helps me in the getting started, right? So it's I can't remember her name right now, but the domestic blisters
Oh,
lady,
Casey Davis.
Casey Davis, yeah.
Yeah.
She said that when she took this same medication that you and I
Mhm.
take, that she felt like what it did was remove that resistance.
Mhm.
So when I see something that I quote unquote should be doing and I decide that is the thing to do, then I don't have this same gravity pulling me down and I'm able to get up and do that thing.
Right. Yeah. It greases the wheels. I think she said something along those lines at one point too. Like
Yeah,
it makes it so I think I heard her in one I'll link to Casey Davis and her book Keeping House While Drowning.
which I have and is
Yes.
excellent.
Is an excellent book. It's great. It's great. She really was one of I told my story in another episode, but she was one of the TikTokers that helped me realize that I had ADHD. She had one episode where she said something like, or one video where she said she would be sitting on the couch and where she would have paralysis and not be able to get up to do her laundry. She had just the ability just to get up and do the laundry.
Yeah,
And that there was, yeah, like you said, the resistance is gone. I experienced that in the lack of anxiety. Like I knew I was anxious, but I didn't realize the profound depth my anxiety had and the impact it had on my thinking until I started taking the medication and the noise calmed down. Just
mhm,
like the like blaring noise in my brain started to kind of shift into like more, you know, lanes of thought, so I could kind of like see, okay, we've got like five things going on right now. Where are we going to put our energy?
yeah,
um where before it was like I could spiral out of control on 15 different things all at once if I
yeah.
wanted to, or if I didn't want to. I didn't want to because nobody wants to do
No,
that.
nobody wants to do that. But we were actually just talking about this. My husband and I were talking about how to motivate her to
Hmm.
do this specific thing at school. And it has to be done. And she's like, there's no dopamine in it for her
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, maybe if we give her this big prize that she can work toward when she
Hmm.
completes the whole program. And I was like, I don't think that's really going to work because it's not immediate enough.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I saw an explanation of ADHD motivators, and a task being important isn't going to motivate you. A task being necessary isn't going to motivate you. And it's not that I don't understand that those things are important. It's not that I don't understand
Right.
that they're necessary. It's that I can't overcome the executive dysfunction to get there. It
Right.
has to be novel or interesting or something I'm passionate about
Mhm.
or urgent.
Right.
I had spent my entire life with urgency as the only
Right.
method I had for getting me to do things. Like that was it. That was the only thing I knew how to do because society and the world around me and my parents who didn't know that I was neurodivergent
Right.
had taught me that making things enjoyable or doing things just that you enjoy is something you get to do as a reward after you've done the
Right.
things that you need
You
to
do
do.
the drudgery,
Right.
and then you get to do the fun things, and that is a kind of a very counter to
It
neurodivergence
it puts you
thing.
in that spiral from a
Yeah.
neurochemical standpoint. From my understanding, I am
Yes.
not a brain scientist, but that it puts you in that downward spiral where your brain
Mhm.
needs dopamine, it's searching for dopamine, it's not finding any dopamine. So then it has a harder time with executive
Right.
function. So then you force it more and it's taking more and more energy for you to get less and less done.
Mhm.
And you're berating yourself and you feel bad about yourself and all of this. Whereas we gamified chores for my daughter, and all I did was list out all the chores that needed to be done, and then I gave her a d20, a 20-sided die, and she would roll it, and like all the fives, so 5, 10, 15, and 20 were take a dance break,
Mm.
right? And everything else was one of the chores, and she got her chores done so fast. And so if she would roll the
Makes you
dice
do
and it
this.
was one that had already been done,
Mhm.
then, I think she got to eat, like, 1 M&M or something. And
Right.
so, as she was getting them done, you get more and more M&Ms. You get
Right.
dance breaks just randomly, and
Right.
so she got her chores done in, like, half the amount of time that it had ever taken
That it
her,
would ever take, yeah.
just by adding this by
A random
adding
element. Yeah.
things to do.
Right. Yes.
It took less time because her brain had that dopamine to be like,
Mhm.
"Okay, I have the fuel to get
Mhm.
through this task I don't wanna do." And
Right.
waiting on the other side of that is another chance, right?
Right.
And so finding ways to do that for myself had not
Right.
occurred to me until I had to start thinking about it from a parenting
Well,
standpoint.
that was gonna be kind of what I was gonna, like, lead into, both in, like, how did the dynamic in your family change when you realized that you and, your child were both neurodivergent? But in addition, like, how did, like, your family respond? Like, I don't have a lot of family to talk about this with anymore. I am
Yeah.
pretty sure that my mom and my brothers are neurodivergent. I brought it up to my one brother that is still with me, and he's just like, meh, like he's 70, he doesn't care at this point. Like, he's like, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, you have ADHD, great,
Mhm.
So how, like, what kind of response did you get from your family, and, like, how did it change for you guys?
God, it changed everything. It changed everything quickly and then slowly. And so I got diagnosed, and then my youngest child got diagnosed, and then my oldest child got diagnosed first with ADHD and then later with autism spectrum disorder. And I have also come to suspect that I am also on the autism spectrum, although I have not gone through the incredibly long process to
Incredibly
get that
long. Yep.
diagnosed. Because paperwork is
Also
the deepest layer of
kryptonite.
hell to me.
Yes.
So I
Same
avoid it.
friend, same.
Um, but there was a lot of resistance from my partner to even get our youngest child evaluated at first. And, um, as I think is true with a lot of people who grew up when I did or earlier than that, there's a lot of stigma attached
Mhm.
to these
The
labels.
diagnoses, the labels, yeah.
I feel like I'm reclaiming it and have found
Mhm.
a lot of comfort in it.
Mhm.
I've heard people use the phrase, it's better to be a normal zebra than an abnormal horse. Like spending your whole life thinking that you're a horse, and being really upset that you have all these stripes and that you're a different shape and that,
Yep.
um, so for me it was a big relief, and I did a deep dive into ADHD and later into autism and trying to figure these things out, and that became like my new thing, and it revolutionized the way that I interact with my children. And we have changed things for them at school. We have changed schools for my oldest child to give them the right balance they need of social time and alone focus time. And we've just been able to shift the whole way that we operate,
Mhm.
instead of trying to fit myself and my children into a spot or a place or a mold within society. I am looking for what is the right shape, what is the right space, and how do we make it so that we can live in that instead of trying to shove ourselves into this other box that doesn't work.
Right.
So that perspective shift was probably the biggest change. Extended family. The whole, and that's when I say that it changed slowly, because the acceptance of extended family has been um, varied and slow process.
Mhm.
And we are very fortunate that the majority of the people in our family want very much to be in our lives, right? And are willing to put forth some effort to understand our needs and those things. But that doesn't mean it's easy or comfortable always. So
Right.
we have had
Yeah.
some interesting conversations and hiccups along the way. Um, my parents were scared, I think is the
Oh.
right word, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they were scared of those labels.
Right.
They were scared of my children having them. They were scared of me having them. And they were scared to start looking at themselves in a way that um,
They didn't wanna be zebras.
they didn't want to be zebras. They
They
had
didn't wanna
spent
be
so
zebras.
long creating their horse facades.
Yes.
and
Yeah.
um, and had it had been so unsafe in
Right.
in their lives for
Well, to be
different
othered
reasons.
at all,
Mhm.
like in any way, it didn't not even just necessarily neurodivergence or
Right.
what we know now as neurodivergence, just to be othered in any way was dangerous and has been throughout history. You know,
Yeah.
we can point to
Yeah.
many identity factors that are dangerous for people to have, but there are I wonder if that's part of my brother sort of just shrugging it off as just like, partially, it doesn't really matter, and partially like I don't want to think about this as a potential for me,
Yeah.
for him, for his life. I wonder what my mom would be thinking, or what my mom's experience of me recognizing this would be like, but that's always forever going to be speculation. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the data on ADHD shows that there is almost no other reasonable conclusion that then basically to have ADHD, you have inherited it.
Right.
There's a lot of overlap in behaviors with CPTSD and ADHD,
Yep.
but there are some very distinct differences, and they, you know, professionals can assess those and see those, and
Right.
that ADHD is something you are born with, and very, very little of it could possibly be attributed to environmental factors during pregnancy. Um, I believe the last statistic I saw on that was 6%,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
the rest of it is just you're just born with it. So the fact that I have ADHD and my children have ADHD means that at least one of my parents has
Right.
ADHD. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
so
Yeah. I strongly suspect that my mom had ADHD and my dad was autistic. Um, and that was just kind of how things rolled, um, for them. But I think that my mom's generation as well, she would feel responsible in some way, like,
yeah.
she would feel responsible, and I think that that might have generated fear as well, like, I was holding her responsible in some way, and I mean, I hold her responsible for some other things, but the ADHD is not, something that I'm like, "Oh my god, you gave this to me," yeah, I have blue eyes, like, "Okay, you didn't just
Right.
pick that either," you know?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that, especially as women.
Yes.
There's a lot of
Mhm.
guilt that is attached to the way that our children are, because it's such a huge power and responsibility to be able to bring forth life into this world
Absolutely.
that um you know a lot of blame gets attached to that.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that most mothers have some interaction with that in some way, but I think for people like my mom who came out of a very abusive childhood and a very,
Mm.
difficult, you know, time when she was younger,
Yeah.
she wouldn't be able to kind of step back and recognize, like, this isn't a blame situation. We don't need to
Right.
point and blame, because in some abusive families, that's the big thing, is you need to have somebody that you can pin everything on. And so
Yeah, I think
she
that's
would
a
have been.
really common dynamic, and
Mhm.
one that my mom had to live through too. So
Yeah. Yep.
try to remind myself and I love my mom. We get along really, really well, and everything that she did, she was doing the very best that she could
Yep.
with the information that she had at the
Yep.
time. And
Yep.
so I hold nothing against my mom,
Right.
but it has made for some slightly uncomfortable and sometimes very amusing conversations around around neurodivergence and things that I now know were the neurodivergent quirks, right?
Right.
um,
Yeah.
just intertwining themselves into our everyday lives while I was growing up. And a
Right.
lot of it is just like my most cherished things about my
Right.
childhood and my
Yep.
family and stuff just wouldn't have been possible or wouldn't have happened without
Right.
us being neurodivergent.
Absolutely. No, and I think there is like I think back about my childhood, and I grew up in a very different time than my brothers did, as you know. My brother's significantly older than I am. So like my family didn't have a lot of money and whatnot. So I grew up in this kind of this magical, childhood where my mom was able to do all kinds of things for me that she hadn't been able to do for my brothers. She was also living out like what she wanted for a childhood
Right.
through my childhood.
Which is a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure. It is a lot of pressure. And see, like when we want to lean on the things I might want to like hold her accountable for, some of that pressure would be part of it. Like, but again, that was not a healed part for her. That wasn't a knowing
Yeah.
thing that she did. But like tell me a little bit about like how you feel like your family, even not knowing that to name it neurodivergence, like I know you've made accommodations and you talked about like gamifying things for your kids and, to get them the dopamine to get things done. What are some ways you think your family accommodated their invisible disabilities before they knew what they were?
Well, I actually think this is one of the things that made it so difficult um, to find out that we are a neurodivergent family is that we were so good at
Right.
having healthy and effective coping mechanisms that were passed down generation to generation that it just would go unnoticed, right?
Right.
So one thing that I think is so fun and hilarious, and when I talk about like the cherished things of my upbringing, is that every woman in my family sings their way through life, and none of us are good singers, and we don't sing like sometimes we sing songs that we heard, but
Right.
that's not what I'm talking about. I'm
Right.
talking about when I go downstairs and I need to grab my purse to get a credit card to input it into something on my computer. I will sing going down the stairs to get my card, not gonna pick up all that stuff, gonna get my card, not more coffee, just gonna get my credit card. And I'll sing this to myself as I go downstairs. And if I have to tell my daughter to do more than 2 tasks, right?
Right.
I
Yep.
I make up a song for it, and then
Nice.
she will sing that song to herself as she's doing them so that she remembers what the next one is. And
Right.
this is a thing that my grandma did. It's a thing that my mom did. It's a thing that my sister did when she nannied my kids. Like,
Mhm.
and it's so ingrained in our lives that it did not occur to me that other people don't do
Well,
this.
it's fascinating because it's both an accommodation in you're helping yourself stay on task with what you're singing, but it's also like satiating that um audio stimming, right? Like
Yes.
I didn't recognize until like less than a year ago that audio stimming was a thing. Like you could that just you talking sometimes is a thing. Like I have all of these weird sounds that I make in the kitchen. And like when I'm cooking and I'm making different things, like I whistle through my teeth, I suck air
Mhm.
in, I do all this stuff. And never thought anything of it, and it's all this like audio stimming where
Mhm.
I'm just using my voice as a stim mechanism. Now I recognize that some of my friends who talk all the time do that too. Like
Absolutely. Or talking to myself or the
Mhm.
dog or, a
Yeah.
lot of those things. Um, we had little spots all over our house growing up where you would put things you didn't want to forget, and that's a thing that as an organizer I have found really helpful is to have people be intentional about this.
Yes.
The majority of my clients actually are neurodivergent in one way or another, and you know all of these accommodations for having your environment set up to work for you
Mhm.
are things that I learned from my mom, really.
Mhm.
Um, and from my parents' relationship. So, my dad definitely has ADHD. I think my mom has ADHD, autism, and
ADHD.
ADHD, but my dad
Mhm.
might also have ADHD. It's
Mhm.
hard to tell. He's less talkative than she is, so I don't quite know as much of what's going on in his brain. But
Right.
they would work together in this way that accommodated each other's things, right? So my
Right.
mom would never touch my dad's doom piles. And a doom pile, it stands for didn't organize, only moved. So
Mhm.
it can be in a box or it can be a pile on a desk. But my
Could
dad
be a
would
junk
always,
drawer.
yes, my dad
Yep.
would always know exactly where something was
Mhm. In
in the
those, yep.
pile. And
Yeah.
if somebody were to clean it up and organize it for him, he would be lost. And so
Yes.
my mom was the kind of person who, when she brought canned goods home from the grocery store, would rotate the oldest ones to the front and face all of the labels in exactly the same orientation. And my dad would have these big piles, and my mom would just leave them alone.
Right.
And this
She
was like
just knew.
astounding to me.
Right.
So it was the way that they had found that worked for them, was to have these different
They
zones.
adapted. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
She had
something.
her space where she got her labels facing, and he had his piles, and
Mhm.
yeah, I'm both of those things. So
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, in different contexts. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
we had all of these different things, and then there's lots of places where neurodivergence overlaps with, um, uh, hypermobility or other
Mhm.
conditions, which,
Yep.
I also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. For a long time, I thought I had the hypermobile type, but it turns out I actually have, oh, I forgot the name of it right now, but I have progressive scoliosis. So,
Oof. Yeah.
there's a type that is, specifically linked to that. But I am also hypermobile, and, we just my mom would talk about, if you stand up too fast, you get the little dizzies, right?
Right.
So, and she would talk about how, if you roll your ankle, you just got to hop it out. And like
Oof. Yeah.
these little things that made it seem so normal and not an issue, because to her it was normal. Everyone else did it in
Right.
the family. And so when I went to, the physical therapist, I got a new physical therapist a couple years ago, and she was like, "I've never met anybody with a chronic illness like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome before who was so at ease with it." Like, she was like,
Interesting.
"Is this the only symptom that you have?" And I was like, "Oh no, I have all the symptoms." And I
Right.
went through all of the things that go on with me,
Right.
and it's the whole list of them, but I'm not upset about it, right? I
Right.
just do what I need to do,
You just accommodate it as you need. Yeah.
and it's not a boogeyman, I guess.
Right.
It's not this thing that I'm like waiting to see how it's going to hurt me next. I
Mhm.
just do what I need to do, and try to foster that gratitude for the things that my body does do. My body is really like abnormal in a lot of ways, and it still manages to get me around and do basically it built people.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, yeah. And it's amazing thing for doing that. And you were hypermobile while you were hypermobile and Ehlers-Danlos while you were building people, like,
Yes.
and that's a special thing too.
Yeah, so I think just not having this anxiety about it, And
Mm-hmm.
that's what keeping us from having a label was what allowed my mom to not have anxiety about it, but
Right.
having a name for it is what took away my anxiety about
Yeah.
it. And so
Yeah.
I'm not going to begrudge her what she needed to alleviate her
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, but it's helping me move forward with my own family in this way where I say, you're not broken, you're not less than.
Right.
These are the things that we need for us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to other people to figure out what they need for them. And comparison is the thief of joy. So don't
Yes.
compare yourself to
Yep.
everybody else. Just figure out what you need.
Yeah. That's a great kind of place, I think, for us to kind of wrap up our conversation. I really appreciate you coming and chatting with me about all this. And, we have had many conversations over the last few years about this. And I appreciate you as one of the touchstones that has helped me sort of unpack my own, journey with this, my own path. So thank you. Where can our listeners find you, and where would you like them to come, discover more about you or perhaps your services?
Yeah, so my business is called Serenispace Home Organization, and our website is www.serenispace.com, and that's SERENISPACE.com.
Sweet. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I've had the privilege of working with Rachel on my big garage organization project, and I can wholeheartedly recommend her services. So check out her site if you're looking for some organizational help. I will have the website in the show notes. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, like and leave a review, and share with your neurospicy-brained friends. Follow us on Instagram at Divergent Paths Consulting, no spaces. And until next time, stay spicy.